Okay. Our next performer is Kat Murphy. Kat currently calls Port Townsend, Washington home. She worked a season as crew in Southeast AK, longlining for halibut and trolling for salmon. And get this, the next season, she decided to buy her own boat and power troll permit and has been running the Grace for the past 2 years. So she gets the Golden Ovary Award for the evening. Please welcome Kat to the stage.
I first started fishing 3 summers ago in 2017 as a deckhand aboard the Monarch. We were fishing in Southeast, longlining for halibut and power trolling for salmon. And I first saw the Grace December of 2018 in Bellingham Harbor. She had a holiday wreath hanging from the side of her cabin, inviting me in, and I found myself scrambling to purchase her in May of that same year and leaving for Alaska to fish in June. She's a wooden power troller, double ender style, built in 1946 in Seattle. She also has a very illustrious history, of which many fishermen would walk down the docks to tell me. Stories of the holds being so full of king salmon that the deckhand was stuck upside down with his legs in the air, tossing out ice in order to shove in more fish. An old man once informed me that one of Petersburg's legendary fishermen owned the Grace. He would catch his own herring to use as bait and always fished alone. If anyone followed or came upon him while on a drag, he'd immediately stack his gear and leave the area, and always came back to town loaded with salmon. It seemed everywhere I went, someone knew this boat. Once, when I was docked in Taku Harbor, I was approached by an Alaska Department of Fish and Game vessel. What I thought would be a routine inspection turned out to be a chance for a nostalgic ex-deckhand to inform me of his glory days fishing kings aboard my boat out on the Fairweather grounds. These stories were wonderful, but full of expectations I didn't know if I could fulfill. Could I live up to the Grace's potential? Was I worthy of her? This is the story of the Grace and I during our first season together. I cut the tip of my finger almost clean off. My forward-running stabilizer line parted underway, and I decided to fix it on anchor. I was using a Vicky knife, which, for those of you that don't know, can cut through bone. And in my case, it did. I saw the blood before I felt anything. I clearly remember moving the tip of my finger like a hinge before I stated that I needed to go to the hospital. As they wheeled me into the OR, my crew told me later, I kept insisting that we were going to leave the next day. As soon as this is done, I'm going to go down and tie up some coho gear and get the boat ready. I have no recollection of this, or arguing with the nurses to stitch me up right then and there. And after being given drugs for pain, drugs for anxiety, drugs for the stomach acid I didn't know I had, it's a wonder I have any memory left of the day at all. When I woke up, to my surprise and horror, the surgeon had amputated the tip of my finger in the fear that it would become infected and necrotic, and he would have to amputate further down below the first joint. The week following was a blur. My crew developed tendinitis in their wrists and left, and I felt like I was in a fog from all the drugs in my system. I couldn't grip or extend my finger without extreme pain, and my stove that I had named Nigel, because he had developed a personality and life of his own, decided to pick this moment to stop working. Now, I firmly believe that all fishermen are animists. We believe that all things have a spirit and a will. And it can seem, while at sea, most things use that spirit and will to torture us. My stove Nigel is a perfect example of this. I'd wake up between 3 and 4 a.m., eyes heavy with sleep deprivation, and I would carry out a conversation with my stove in my head. Well, Nigel, we have a long day ahead of us. Maybe I'll fry an egg. And after the egg would slosh around in the pan, uncooked for the next 2 minutes, he'd reply, "An egg? It's 4 a.m. Warm the engine, heat the boat, then maybe you'll get some coffee out of me in an hour." My history with Nigel had been brief but full of drama. All he did was clog and soot and huff and puff and blow himself out. You never knew when he would decide to start blowing black smoke and chunks of creosote out of his stack. I wrapped it up to my friend's troller for the night, and we awoke in the morning to Nigel sitting all over his beautiful paint job. The shame. So I'm down in the galley trying to troubleshoot why my stove won't light, and I noticed the fuel line looked chafed, so I started rotating it around to get a better look, and all of a sudden it parted clean through and started spilling diesel all over the inside of the boat. By the time I had ripped the companionway stairs out one-handed in order to close the fuel tanks that I should have closed in the first place, I was surrounded by a pool of fuel covering my galley floor. My finger bandage smelled like diesel, which I thought couldn't be good, and I just started crying. I was surrounded by people on every side of the harbor bustling down the docks, and I really had never felt so alone. What am I doing here? Why do people do this to themselves? Why am I doing this to myself? Can I even do this? As I sat on my galley floor covered in fuel, all these questions were swirling around in my head on repeat. And I just kept thinking about what my friend had told me on the phone as I was preparing to move the Grace from Bellingham to Sitka. Everyone believes you can do this, Kat. Everyone believes you can do this but you, and you'll figure out you can pretty soon. I hadn't even left for Alaska yet, and there it was, like a bee sting. The thing I had been thinking in the dark corners of my mind, and now the thought was out in the open, swelling, and I had to deal with it. A week after the surgery, I was fishing off the coast of Cape Edgecombe. At this point, I was hand-to-mouth fishing to keep fishing, so I was feeling pretty determined. And as the waves and sky steadily built and turned gray, I kept going, pushing, further offshore, following the bite. Suddenly, I found myself surrounded by freezer boats with 10-plus feet of length on the Grace. And still, I kept pushing, further offshore, following the bite. The Grace was shooting around like a champagne cork. One of my Gerties decided to start freewheeling, sending my troll wire plummeting into the ocean depths. My finger was throbbing because I kept knocking it into things. My crew was puking over the side. I sat down on the fish-hold hatch and looked out into the ocean swell, a bit bleary-eyed. I saw the Grace's stern rise up high into the air, blocking the horizon, and then come swinging down. In this moment of chaos, I thought of the words of Ernest K. Gann. What a beautiful thing a boat is. What house could take such abuse? I decided then that it was too nasty. Defeated, I stacked my gear on board so I could make my turn quickly and avoid getting caught in the trough, then reset it on a tack closer to shore and safety. A few weeks later, during the second king opener, and after one terrifying and costly breakdown where I had lost my steerage, I'm off the coast of Cruzoff Island, trying to wrap my head around the technical skill and, to me, voodoo of king fishing. It's a calm wind, but big swell day. The sky is bluebird blue, the clouds puffy and happy. At this point, I can get through a whole day without crying out in pain and having my finger throb for the next hour because I extended it too far or bumped it the wrong way. I'm finally feeling more comfortable as the captain, but I'm still so far behind that I don't know how I'm going to afford my loan payment and basic maintenance costs. However, one thing is certain. I am not catching any kings. Big sunning ocean cohos, but no kings. I start to haul in my float wire, and snap, my wire goes. Now, it's not new for a troller to lose a wire, but in this particular situation, I had just replaced that Gertie with brand new wire, and had recently purchased a very expensive new hydraulic steering ram after I lost steerage in Sitka Harbor due to a bent piston, and had to have it gold streaked there, so that I would not miss the king opener that I was now fishing. The good news was that the donuts I had attached to the wire caught on the fair lead, which basically meant that the wire was still attached to the boat. The bad news was that it was around 50 fathoms down below the water, and I had no way of hauling it back on board. In this moment, I thought of what my boss, Tim Lee, told me one time when I was working for the Shipwrights Co-op in Port Townsend. Never be afraid to fail spectacularly. And I thought, this is it. It's nearing the end of August. Time is running out. So is the money. This is the moment. And I was oddly at peace with it. A calmness spread over me. And after talking to my friend on the radio and a few failed attempts to get the wire back, I had an idea. I rigged up a snap hook to a piece of thin braided line and tied it to the boat. Swung the boat hard over, hoping that as the wire swung towards the boat, it wouldn't wrap around the propeller, and had my crew try and snap the hook in between the marks on the wire when it got within arm's length. Because at this point, what have I got to lose, except lots of expensive gear, and possibly getting towed back to town? It worked. My crew grabbed it on the first try. I crimped the wire in place to where it had previously parted, hauled it on board, got back all the gear, and 7 cohos. By this point, I was starting to realize that the grace was on my side, even if Nigel was against us. I would put us in ridiculous situations, like getting caught in the gale in Georgia Strait with my poles up. We rolled so hard that I don't even want to finish the thought. Or when we tried to make it through Wrangell Narrows into Petersburg Harbor during an opposing tide at max ebb during one of the biggest tidal swings of the month, because I was tired and just wanted to dock. I could see the harbor entrance with my binoculars. How bad could it be? It felt like an enraged river charging at us, attempting to spit us back up where we started. I had to bump up the engine to beyond its max RPMs just so that I wouldn't stand still as I clawed my way into the slip. Each time I felt like she was giving me a free pass. Okay, I'll let this one slide, but remember this moment. Learn from it, she'd tell me as I nervously rubbed my finger on a section of wood on her windowsill that I'm sure 5 years from now will start to show some wear. After I got my wire back and hauled those 7 coho on board, things just seemed to turn around for the Grace and me. I ended up salvaging my finances in the last 3.5 weeks of the season. And on our last day fishing, the water was flat, the sky blue, the sun out, the cohos biting, and we were the only ones out there. It was then I realized that the biggest hurdle I had to get over wasn't the defeating feeling of the mechanical breakdowns, or the fear of the gales I had been caught in, or even the pain of losing a literal piece of myself. These things I would and will always feel. The biggest hurdle was teaching myself that I could rise to the occasion, that I could meet these things over and over again and push through. I'm proud to be a part of the Grace's next chapter. And maybe I'll never be a Petersburg fishing legend or have king salmon brimming out of her holds, and that's really okay. But maybe there is a way for both boat and human to meet in the middle. Thank you.
My name is Raymond Chorneau.
Okay. Is this your first time here?
Not my first time, no, but first time coming to the Fisher Folk Poets, you know. Enjoyed it last night. I had a friend who was reading, um, Duncan Barry. He's from, I mean, he lived here and fished here and now lives a little further south down the Salmon River. But he came to read, and so I was compelled to come and join. And so it was a pleasure, yeah.
Any surprises?
A lot of people my age who have bought the good fight and lived to tell about it, you know. So it's always a pleasure to look into those faces and see the truth, you know. So it's an authentic gathering, you know. So,
Authentic?
authentic, yeah. The characters. So I'm as much taken by the faces as by the poems themselves, you know. So, but I'm glad that they're still doing it. So, anyway,
Where are you from?
well, I live in Portland now, yeah, but I come from the East Coast, so
I have a feeling you have quite a story.
I do, but we don't have time. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.